Okie doke. This is Cindy Blaine. Welcome to California Relief's webinar today. I'm super jazzed to welcome you to this webinar on Urban Tree Canopy Interactive Map presented by Miranda Hutten, who is with the U.S. Forest Service in the Pacific Southwest region. There must have been an awful lot of interest in this because we got over 116 people signed up for this webinar. That's why I was leaving a few more minutes for people to sign in, and people still are signing in, as you guys can see. But we want to get rolling. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Miranda, and then we'll go through some housekeeping items. Actually, let's go through the housekeeping items first. You can see on the screen that there is one CEU for today from the Western Chapter ISA. We called yesterday and got it at the last minute. So the way this is going to work is you will fill out the form that's available on our website, as you can see on the screen, and then we'll be sending in the GoToWebinar attendee list as confirmation that you were here. If you have any questions about that, you could call us or you could call Rose Epperson at the Western Chapter ISA. As far as questions during this this presentation, we want you to type them into the, is this webinar still happening? Somebody just asked a question. So yes, we have questions on the side. We're going to collect all those questions and ask them at the end of Miranda. I'll read them out loud, and we're going to try and get to all of your questions. And then you're here because of this scientific tool. So we know you like science, and we wanted to give you a heads up for our next webinar, which is going to be in February, on February 26th, with Dr. Desiree Backman and Dr. Neil Kohatsu, both with UC Davis Institute for Population Health Improvement. This will be a talk on green prescription, improving population health through environmental interventions. And they'll be talking about some of the latest science happening around this. I hope you'll join us. What we'll do is we'll send out a follow-up email to this presentation, and there'll be the information there, as well as our usual email distribution list going out later this week with that webinar. So again, we really want your questions. Please type them into the chat box. Oh, and you can see on the screen now the green prescription description. If you want to sign up, you would do that at the webinars page on our website. Miranda, let me describe you a little bit of background on Miranda. She came to California 5 years ago, and California is super lucky to have her on our team because Miranda is incredibly smart and a big picture thinker. She's always looking for innovative ways to connect the dots on urban trees, community action, scientific research and tools, and new partners. So Miranda took on this project on the Urban Tree Canopy Interactive Map pretty much as a personal project a year ago and carefully shepherded the map to completion this past fall. Her background before she came to California was that Miranda was a Presidential Management Fellow for the U.S. Forest Service, where she provided technical and financial assistance on the Forest Service landowner assistance programs. And she has a master's in both natural resources management and applied ecology from the School of Environmental and Public Affairs at Indiana University. We're delighted she left the East Coast and came west. And at this point, let me turn it over to Miranda.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate the lovely introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be here today to talk about a new tool that aims to show and visualize information on California's urban tree canopy. Hopefully, I see some familiar faces on the attendee list and some new ones too. Hopefully, if you're joining us on this webinar, you can recognize the value of seeing and visualizing urban tree canopy cover in California. But those that aren't as familiar maybe with our urban tree canopy cover, it really is an important tool for us to use for community design and implementing sound management practices. Whether it's prioritizing tree plantings, helping us establish forest management plans, or managing threats to canopy loss, being able to understand what trees are on the ground and where can really help us in the work that we do as an urban forestry network, but also our partners that are interested from the public health sector or the infrastructure sector to understand the work and why we do what we do. So first, a little bit of history about how this tree canopy project came about. So back in 2012, CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service got together and said, hey, there's these great new pieces of technology out there that can translate aerial imagery into different types of object classes, whether it's impervious surface or buildings, but also canopy cover. And so CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service put together some funding and generated a contract through a group called Earth Define that used national agricultural imagery from aerial imagery, NAPE imagery, if you've heard that expression before, to tease out where our canopy is on the landscape. Simply put, it takes the pixel level at a 1 meter spatial resolution, and we use a teaching algorithm to teach our computer to be able to look at color of a pixel and be able to tell, nope, that's a tree, oh, that's a shrub, oop, that's impervious surface. I have much more detail on my website about how that's done, but that's kind of the 10,000 foot level about how this canopy was derived. It was done at, as I mentioned, at a 1 meter spatial resolution and resampled at 5 meter resolution for use here. We were immediately able to tell some information from that canopy layer that was derived that was really important. And maybe you already know this because it's been out for a while, that California's urban tree canopy cover covers 15% of the state's urban areas. Further groups like Greg McPherson in conjunction with UC Davis, I see he's on today, so glad he's there. Hopefully I get these numbers right, was able to combine this canopy tree canopy data with existing inventory data using created transfer functions to get an estimate not only on the number of trees we have in our forest, but the value it has. Conservative estimates say that we were looking at 173 million trees in our state's urban areas. That's an annual value of ecosystem services estimated at $8.3 billion. Yes, that's B with a billion. And our urban forest asset has been valued at $181 billion. If you're interested in more of the work that Greg McPherson did, his article is cited on the Viewer website that I'll be showing you a little later. And you can link to it and read it. This information is super valuable, right? It can tell us, it can help us educate policymakers about why it matters that we invest in the trees planting and the care and maintenance for them. But there was more we could do with that data. There were some limitations. It wasn't available to everyone to use and manipulate on a community level. And some of the data was a little unwieldy in the type of formatting and size it was in. I heard a lot from natural resource program managers, small communities, local nonprofits, both in the urban forestry world and outside of that, saying it would be really helpful to have a tool out there that we could see it very easily, where the trees are, this canopy layer. And so born from that was this urban tree canopy viewer idea that I've been working on with some folks here in the U.S. Forest Service for the last year. And as I mentioned, its purpose is to help visualize where the trees are and where they are not in our urban areas. The canopy cover layer, very simply put, is the branches and stems and leaves that we can see when viewed from see on the ground when viewed from above. And what we were able to do is generate from that canopy layer not only the percent of that canopy layer, but also created a separate layer that did relative canopies within a community based on census tract. What I mean by this is a number of communities said, well, what's a good percentage for canopy cover, and what is our canopy cover relative to surrounding communities? And so it was important for us to create this additional layer so you had some relative understanding of where your canopy was across a community. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this, but the darker the blue, the lower the number. And this is just an example of San Luis Obispo right here. I sort of feel like I have to give the caveats, you know, at the end of a commercial where they speed in really fast and they're like, not eligible for people under the age of blah, 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 blah. I have a couple caveats about this data. And I highlight this also on our website, is it's not perfect. It's not a one-to-one match. It is an estimate. The algorithm is not perfect. Sometimes it sees a small, it identifies a small tree as a shrub, and sometimes it identifies a big shrub as a tree. Shadows can be an issue. And it's generally seen to be more accurate in areas that have medium density urban areas, suburbs, and rural areas, as opposed to the high density city areas like San Francisco and downtown LA. However, most of those high density areas actually have existing LiDAR data and have done this already. So the viewer target users are everybody else that maybe don't have the assets or the computational power to do this. Earth Define did an accuracy test on the data. It was in the high 80s, low 90s for most of it. And in fact, the US Forest Service, we did a separate audit of that, and we got the same number. And so there's a pretty high accuracy level with this data, but no, it isn't perfect. It's an algorithm that it has some good points and some bad points, and so it's always important to kind of take that into consideration when looking at any data source, regardless of whether it's the Canopy or not. Okay, so I had debated about whether to take you right into the website and just start playing around with it, but I knew if I tried to do that, this would be the day that my computer decided it wanted to do automatic updates and wouldn't turn on or wouldn't work properly. So what I've done instead is I've created a lot of screenshots to show you the functionality of the program. And if questions arise at the end, I have the website pulled up that we can answer those questions in real time. The viewer itself is created on a ArcGIS platform and is available for anyone that has a web browser. It has a number of different layers in it. I've talked about the Canopy layer and how I did it by quartiles and percentages. You can see that in there. I've highlighted that. I also have that tree layer, just the green layer, there for identifying where the trees are located. But I've also included other layers on population, environmental, and social characteristics that can help us identify communities that are disproportionately burdened by the risks that urban trees can help ameliorate. These layers I'll talk a little bit more about in detail further on in the presentation. I get a lot of questions about the color choices that we made. Miranda, why aren't you doing red to green? And the answer is that federal government requires what we call 508 compliance. So if you're colorblind, oftentimes red and green look like the same color. And so the viewer is 508 compliant for visual, and people who are also hearing impaired as well too. So that is why it's those colors. But so I get that question a lot. And why quartiles? That matches the layer information that's with Cal EnviroScreen. And we heard from our partners that a lot of the layers that you were interested in was mirroring these with Cal EnviroScreen layers. So we wanted to be consistent about how we divvied it up, and not so much detail that you would get lost. So it was part by design, part by functionality, and how it would be viewed on the viewer. Okay, so the ArcGIS map acts a whole lot like Google Maps. You know, when you're trying to get driving directions, you type in an address. Let's say you want to visit me today at my office. You would type in 1323 Club Drive in Vallejo, California, and it would toggle to that address and immediately show you the urban tree canopy layer. That's the automatic layer that's turned on. One of the features that we heard folks wanted was a print feature. Oh, hold on, back to the places. You can also type in a place. Say you want to look at downtown Sacramento or Woodrow Wilson Middle School. You can type in those names, and they will be able to toggle to those as well too. So it's a lot like it's a lot like Google Maps like that. We heard a lot of folks were interested in being able to print the maps. If they're viewing it, they wanted to be able to easily print that map and share it either on a presentation or with partners or with policymakers or with funders. And so we have the print function there that you can zoom in and zoom out to your community size and scale, and it'll automatically print that map for you. You do not have to do it. It also has two different types of base maps. One is automatic, is a topographic map, and the other one is satellite imagery. So you can get these structures on the ground to help with tree planting prioritization, or to know why there are maybe big gaps in your tree canopy. It might not be that it is a planting area that you can use, or maybe you need to rip up some impervious surface to get there. So that is available. And last but not least, anytime you type in an address or a place, you can click on it, it'll tag it for you, and it gives you all of the details about that area across all of the layers. So the layers functionality color-wise are based up by quartiles, but you can get the total number of populations for that census tract, the poverty incidence, the asthma incidence, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. And I get a lot of questions of why by census tract. A lot of grants are broken up by census tract, and so we decided that that would be a way to look at this data that would help the most people, the most amount of people that would be using this, our target audience of folks that can use the viewer but don't necessarily have the skills to download it and manipulate it themselves. So a little bit about the layers. How did I pick out the layers? Well, the answer is I didn't pick them out. You all picked them out. I went to regional councils. I talked to the California Urban Forest Council, CAL FIRE, and some major groups. And I said, what are the things that you would want to get out of this viewer? And as I mentioned, it was mostly folks wanting to identify characteristics of community, being able to identify communities along with the canopy layer that are disproportionately burdened by the risks that urban trees can ameliorate. So you can see there's a variety of different layers in there. There's General Census Tract Bureau, information about demographics there, population size, the census tract. We have information about the Cal and virus screen layers. We didn't include all the Cal virus screen layers, the ones that I think related most, we could relate through research and science to our urban tree health. So for instance, the poverty incidence is measuring the population living below 2 times the federal poverty level. The asthma and cardiovascular disease incidents are based on emergency department visits in that census tract. Your ozone and particulate matter pollution are based off air quality monitors throughout the state of California. And your water body impairment is actually a measure of a number of different types of pollution that it can be found in water, and the water, that particular body of water is given a score. Also included in this was the, people were very interested in including the Urban Heat Island Index done by Cal EPA. Particularly in Southern California. No surprises there. There's a lot of grants for a lot of public health entities and a lot of sustainability nonprofits that are working to ameliorate the effects of urban heat island by tree canopy cover. And so it was really important for us to be able to identify those areas in greatest need based on that measure. Please note with the Cal EPA, it's not everything else. Every other layer covers all urban areas in California. The Urban Heat Island Index does not cover all urban areas. So for instance, City of LA has an Urban Heat Island Index, but San Luis Obispo does not, and that's just based on where Cal EPA decided to prioritize putting together that index. So not everybody has that, but we felt even though it didn't cover everything, it was important to have. So maybe I've convinced you that this is a tool that might be helpful either for your partners or yourself to work with. let me give you an example of something I recently did for a partner using the viewer. Maybe some of you are familiar with the agricultural city of Santa Maria. I've worked and lived there, and it's over 100,000 people. It's in the Central Coast, mostly an agricultural community with a fair amount of folks also commuting to San Luis Obispo and surrounding cities. I was approached by some partners there that said, hey, we're interested in applying for a grant for tree planting. Can you help us out? And I said, absolutely. And they said, we want to plant in areas with low canopy cover. And so I pulled up the city of Santa Maria and I said, well, you've got that. You have low canopy cover. And in fact, it's most of your city. You have a little bit down to the south near Orchid that's it's got a little bit more, but your priority area is the city area, which is great for grant purposes, not for your health purposes. And I said, well, what does this grant look like? And they said, well, Miranda, we need to put it in, we need to prioritize tree plantings where the people are. And I said, okay, let's look at where the people are. So the high yellow areas are the more people. And so I said, it looks like you've got a fair number of people in a corridor by Route 101, but also a fair number of people in the northwestern part of Santa Maria. Maybe that's an area you want to target for your tree planting. And they said, oh, absolutely. But we're also wanting to find the communities that need it the most. Can you help us with that? And I said, well, I think poverty and asthma might be something you're interested in ameliorating. And they said, absolutely. So we looked at the poverty rate and we said, okay, so again, northern Santa Maria seems to have a little bit of a higher poverty incidence among the census tract. And in particular, that one census tract that sort of reminds me a little bit of the shape of Utah seems to be the target area again and again. And then we also looked at asthma incidence, and again that target area around that Utah-shaped census tract came up, and I overlaid it with where your trees are. And they said, wow, you know, that seems to be an area we want to target our grant with. And they said, can you help us out some more? Where should we plant the trees? And I said, well, what are some main areas you want to prioritize here? And they said, well, we also want to do it in the city center where people live, work, and play. So we toggled to the city center. This is Santa Maria downtown. There's the downtown center. There's this main street. And we were able to pull up where all the trees are located and where they're not. Not a lot along that main street. And I said, well, maybe it's an infrastructure issue. Maybe you've got a lot of impervious surface there. So we pulled up an aerial satellite imagery and we walked through the downtown area, main street, and side streets, and were able to target an area that they could drive through and maybe prioritize tree plantings both in public and private land. And they were able to successfully put in for a small community grant and get the approval of the local council to plant along the main street in that corridor area. So it was a successful project in terms of using this viewer. Another group that's using it is there's a couple of nonprofits that work both in the city of LA and the county of LA. Just because it's a political boundary doesn't mean that the nature works that way or our work works that way. We think sometimes bigger scale. And so they were trying to get a baseline map for setting up where the trees are and the type of work that's going on. And this was a way that they could communicate very easily with both parties in the city and in the county about where the trees are and the type of work that would benefit both of those entities. This by no means replaces a lot of the businesses and private groups that do tree inventories or viewers for folks, because there's no interpretation with this. There's no customization with this. And so if for those people that can do the work, can do the prioritization interpretation, this is a tool that can help you start that process. But for people that want that bigger analysis, right, some private entity to do that for you, that's certainly still the role that those businesses have. And all this information is just public available information that I'm just rehashing and putting into the viewer. Oh, and last but not least, I totally lost the end of that Santa Maria story. Last but not least, you can click on Santa Maria, and they were able to pull up the absolute numbers of poverty incidence and asthma, which were pretty high for them relative to other communities, and be able to use that to sell to the city council for tree planting. So that was a really cool outcome for that particular group to do that. And I think there's a lot of other small applications and large applications we can use with this viewer. Now, you may be saying, Miranda, this viewer is pretty nice, but I don't really like the layers you put with this. This is not helpful. I am in the wildlife field. I want to know where the biological wildlife corridors are, or I'm just all about waterways, and I want to know where all the secondary and small tributaries are. You don't have this on your map identified. And I'm happy to say, for those that want to do it, the layers are now available and free to download on my website. You can download the uber big Urban Canopy California zip file, but we've also broken it down by city clusters, so you can download your section if you don't want the whole entire statewide data. You simply just save the file, download, and go. And it's usable both on ArcGIS platforms and freely available GIS platforms because it's a TIFF file. So it's not just an ArcGIS file that you have to use with ArcGIS. And I personally think that's important because I want to make sure that everyone can use it and that it's freely available to folks that want to use it. Okay, so maybe you want to play around with it. That's the best way, of course, to understand how a viewer works. You can type out this really complicated \E awful website that I can't change. Or you can Google some permutation of U.S. Forest Service Canopy Tree Viewer, and you will get it too. It'll toggle you to my homepage website, and it'll also allow you to just, all you have to do is click on that wonderful image icon, and it will take you automatically to the viewer page where you can get not only start the viewer, but it has all of the background important information with this viewer, i.e. detailed information about all the layers. I kind of skimmed over those, but if you want to know what day the air monitors were collected and what year and how that was calculated, I have that all on my website available because some folks are really interested in how the data was created. And I have that also for the Canopy viewer too, or Canopy Layer, excuse me. So rightly so, a lot of people ask me, well, this viewer is great. Glad you're working on the last year. The data's a little old. And I go, yeah, I totally get that. And so I am really happy to say that we already have a contract out, and by we, I mean CAL FIRE and ourselves, U.S. Forest Service, to get an updated canopy layer using updated NAPE imagery. And I'm really excited that it will be available for download and viewing later this year in 2020. Yay, I'm so excited. We're gonna do a couple other things with this canopy layer. Again, we're hoping that folks will be interested to calculate the ecosystem services. They'll be pulling inventory data and using the same transfer functions. We've tentatively reached out to UC Davis, and with Greg McPherson on the phone today, maybe they would also be interested in collaborating with that again, because it's such a powerful tool to understand and communicate the value of our trees in California. Of course, I am going to be conducting a change analysis. That means I'm going to be mushing the old tree canopy layer with the new one and identifying areas where we've gained tree canopy cover and lost tree canopy cover. I think that's going to be a really useful tool about not only prioritizing where we want tree canopy cover to go in the next 5 years, but also with the CCI investments that we've had, we're thinking we'll be able to see that first round on the ground with this canopy layer, this NAPE imagery canopy layer. So we're actually going to be able to see our impact on the ground with this that first major investment. So I think that's pretty cool. And also maybe identify some larger trends about where we're losing canopy cover, whether it's from, and maybe some guesses about speculating about where it might go from there. Last but not least, I have LiDAR data with a question mark. I wanted to share this all with you, is that in the governor's budget and supported by California's Natural Resource Department is an effort to get statewide LiDAR data. This is not being shepherded by the urban and community forest world, but actually from the forest health side of things. And they're targeting rural areas, but it's going to cover all states, so we get to benefit from their work. I don't see this coming on for another 2 or 3 years or so, and I don't know how they're planning to visualize it, but I'm in the loop with the folks that are working on it, and I plan, if that information comes available, to make it downloadable and viewable on this viewer as well. And for those that are familiar with LiDAR data, this adds an extra level of information to our tree canopy cover. There's been a lot of research recently of using LiDAR to identify tree species on our forests. Because of the elevation, you're able to identify the shape and make a guess at tree species. So there is this kind of potential there that we could get some really cool inventory data from this LiDAR, but it's all speculation at this point, right? Until the governor actually signs it and it's in. But I wanted to make that make you all aware of that, because it's such an important update and change to how we view the canopy if it actually happens. So last but not least, I just wanted to thank all of our partners that were putting this together. The U.S. Forest Service, that includes the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Region, our research station, CAL FIRE for its continued support and work to get the updated layer so I can play around with it on the computer, Earth Define for processing it, and UC Davis for helping with our research team to help create those transfer functions for ecosystem services. Really can't do it without those partners, and they're really critical also to the next steps of moving this forward. So a round of applause to them for all the help. Certainly I didn't go into every single detail of functionality for the viewer, but I am happy to answer questions at this point about what it can and can't do, and and also answer more technical questions about it. If you're interested more in when the images for NAEP imagery were collected, or the resolution and how that was, or the accuracy, excuse me, of it, I'm happy to answer the questions as I can, and if I can't, I'll make sure to get answers back to you. And with that, I turn it over to Cindy.
Thank you very, very much, Miranda, for all that information. I've heard a little bit about it. I didn't see the presentation that you've done in the past, but this really helped a lot. So thank you for all your work to make this possible. And so far, we don't have any questions, but I have a couple comments that I want to run through. I also want to say I really appreciate the fact that you're making the data available to download, and that it's in a TIFF instead of an ArcGIS. As somebody who works for nonprofits, some of us can afford to get ArcGIS, and some of us can't, even with the discount that you can get. So that's really nice to have that downloadable. The other thought I had was, you do have a URL for your website, which is really long. So for California Relief, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and put in a link to your website on our website, probably under the webinar, and then Mariela will tell me where else we should put another one. And the other thing to know about our website is if you ever use the Google search box at the top, you could put in urban tree canopy assessment map and interactive map, and that'll pull up whatever we have on our website. So that's kind of a little bit of housekeeping. The question I have was, we were talking about the different layers that you've got in there, and you've got the Cal EPA urban heat island data. I was wondering if in future iterations you would be considering adding other layers, because we also know that there's another heat tool out there, and I don't know how it would mix, but it's the one called CHAT. Mariela found it. It's the California Heat Assessment Tool, which also comes from the California Natural Resources Agency. Is that possible, Miranda, or did you?
Absolutely. So for us, we're open to kind of thinking about adding more layers, with the exception of the Cal EPA index. The one kind of caveat I have is I think it makes sense if we're going to do it, that I get coverage that covers all of the urban areas that we have. And so that is my kind of, I got a lot of questions for layers that, you know, just help, say, San Francisco or just help San Diego. But I really want to make sure that if I'm putting something up there, it's something that everyone can use, because my target audience, statewide. And so that is it. And, you know, I did, for this initial iteration, I think we kept it to like 12 layers total, because we felt like, it, you know, at a certain point, people who are not as savvy in the ArcGIS viewer world might get a little confused if there was like 40 layers in there to click on and off. And also there was a kind of a question of capacity of your computer to load and visualize all of this. And so we had the question that, you know, that we would keep it to kind of for this round, these first 12. That kind of focused in on those environmental justice questions, and then expand it to something where it has more environmental layers in the next round with it. So great question, thank you.
You're welcome. I had, Mariela, you're still there, right? Because didn't we use this, or didn't you use this tool to compare Southern California to Northern California for something recently? And I'm in the next room from Mariela, so I gotta give her a second.
Yes, we did.
Can you explain how we used it? Because I think it was sort of a local solution, and that might be helpful to people.
Really, I just used the canopy layer with all the different shades, the census tracts, to compare LA County to the Bay Area, and then I just took a snip of those images and send it to the decision maker that I wanted to talk to.
Elected officials. So this could be used for advocacy purposes, what we're trying to say. If you know, we've talked about this, I think, in the past, way back even when I was at Sacramento Tree Foundation, that we would talk about, oh, a lot of times elected officials like to see what's happening in their district compared to the next district over. So that this will be by census tracts, but you may be able to do something to show where the districts are, because there is sometimes competition between groups saying, oh, well, we want to have more trees in our neighborhood. So that's another possibility.
Yeah.
And then I think that's it as far as the comments or questions I had. And we do have a chat area.
Yeah, some of the attendees have like a little question mark next to them that says has unanswered question. I don't know if it's showing in the chat box.
The chat box, Mariela, help me out here, because the chat box just has stuff from the very beginning where it said,
you answered it.
I have no clue. Where are the bunch of the questions?
I see a little question mark but I can't seem to access the question.
Me neither. Is it good? Is it down here? Should we just do it at your desk?
Yeah, do you want to go to my desk?
Sure. Okay, hold on 2 seconds, guys. Remember, we're a small nonprofit. Hold on.
All right, in the meantime, I'm just going to put up the viewer so everybody can see it, hopefully. That way you can kind of see the home screen and the layers and how they toggle on and off. And I'm going to do what I said I wasn't going to do, which is toggle and try it out and see if you can eyes all see it. Boop. And there's where I am.
Okay, don't go anywhere. So people can hear me. Okay, can you guys hear me? Oddly enough.
Yes.
Okay, I can't even hear myself too well. All right, so the first question is from Ann Schneider. And the question is, the city of Millbrae is directly west by northwest of San Francisco International Airport. We are subjected to extreme low frequency noise as well as higher frequency noise from planes in flight. We've been told by engineers specializing in noise that trees and plants can help absorb and not bounce low frequency noise. End result, we want to do a tree planting program that will help absorb GHGs, but also help with noise. Can this program help us identify places to plant dense evergreen trees? Anne is the vice mayor of the city of Millbrae. Thank you very much for joining the conversation and for your question.
Yeah, so I think this is one part of the puzzle that can help you with this. You know, there's a fair bit of research out there that would be worth taking a look at about tree species that maybe you want to think about that can kind of mitigate and what tree attributes might mitigate the noise pollution that you're dealing with. And what you can do is toggle to the airport, say in Millbrae, and look around at where your trees are and where possible sites are. And it can also, with the base layer map, can help you identify who the landowner is, if it's a home or if it's a park or things like that. So at least get you started in that conversation about where those priority areas would be. If the priority areas happen to be impervious surface, that's really easy to see with this map. And so you need to probably estimate some money to dig up that impervious surface, plant the trees. And so that can help you with that. You know, I don't know if there's information out there about, you know, where the noise pollution is most prevalent, you know, in areas and, you know, the angle of trees to mitigate some of that. But I'm pretty sure there's probably some research out there that can help you with that. And as I mentioned, there's also a number of businesses and private industries that's their job, is to prioritize your needs and your layers to create a tree planting program. Again, this doesn't replace that role. It's just kind of a way to get you started. And maybe you have folks internally that can use this data, download it, and put in your own priorities to print. I hope that answers your question.
Cool. Okay, moving right along. And Anne, of course, if you have any further questions, you could call us at California Relief at any time. Our number is everywhere, and I'm pretty sure you can call Miranda at any time too. We're here to help. So the next question is from Sherman Dean, and the question is this a free tool? And the answer is
yes.
Definitely, yes, definitely.
Oh, yes. Everything is free and available to the public and anyone. And that's part of the beauty of government access is when we pay for something, we make sure it's available to everyone. Yay.
Cool. Oh, and then Sherman had a follow-up question, which is, does this tool cover Bay Area for all these layers?
Yes.
Okay.
Bay Area urban areas. Bay Area urban areas. So let's zoom in just a little bit here. If you are an urban area in the Bay, you are covered. Oops. Zoom, zoom, zoom. So you can see it's not going to cover the mountains, but it is going to cover all of your major urban areas. This is just Santa Clara as an example. Okay.
Cool. And also, Anne had a follow-up question, and that was, how did you identify communities with PM 2.5 pollution? In San Mateo County, we only have one air monitor, and it is in the southern end of the county. But we know we are getting 0.10 micron PMs from San Francisco Airport, so we are curious.
Okay, so the answer is I didn't gather this data. This data is put together by another party that is part of the Cal EnviroScreen, and you're absolutely right. We do need more air monitors. There's some, as I said with the Canopy layer, I say you need to have that sense of accuracy across all layers, no matter what you're viewing, because they're not a perfect one-to-one match. It's based on the available information. So for instance, I believe that particular information in the Cal EnviroScreen was derived. Hold on, let me pull up my information just real quick. is a quarterly means extracted from air monitors from 2012 to 2014, and a mean that was calculated by the average across 3 years. So if you don't have a lot of air monitors in your community, that average is going to be a little skewed if it's in it doesn't have good coverage.
Cool. All right. The next is a question and a comment from Drew Reddy down in Southern California. What a wonderful tool. Has there been any assessment to determine the margin of error?
Yes. Aha. What a great question. So I mentioned in the beginning, so Earth Define as one of their products did do an accuracy assessment, and it was in the high 80%. We read the calculations, and actually I had a poor intern. Actually, she liked it. With our GIS analyst, we set up our own audit of it, and basically what we did was we threw out, I think it was over 1,000 random points within the urban cluster, and we confirmed or didn't confirm whether or not it was accurate. So if the point there was on a tree and the Earth Define labeled it as a tree, we looked at the actual image and we confirmed it, and we said, yes, that's accurate. And then we went to another area, and nope, that's actually a shadow. And so we did an independent audit of the data and had a similar accuracy rating. As I mentioned, just how when we were doing this accuracy, what we observed was that in highly urbanized areas, think like downtowns, San Francisco, the accuracy level was a little bit lower, and then in the rest of the areas, it was pretty high.
Cool. All right. Our next question comes from Rachel Malerich, who is the City of LA's first urban forest officer, or Chief Urban Forest Officer. I hope I got that right, Rachel. Rachel's question is, I've heard that an updated statewide urban tree canopy is coming, UTC is coming. Will that layer be added to the map for comparison, like looking at urban tree canopy change over time in communities?
Yes, it will be added, and hopefully sometime in this year. So get excited, folks. We're going to have updated stuff. We run into not to get into like the devil's detail, but we ran into a small hiccup with the new layer and having it not done the exact same way as the previous layer, so I can't do that change analysis, but we're getting that fixed. And so I can do the change analysis. And so what I plan to do is when I unveil the new canopy layer is to also unveil the new change analysis out there with it, so you guys can all look at it and see it and use it for your communities, which is pretty cool.
Excellent. And the next question is from Amos White, who's in Alameda with the 100,000 Trees for Humanity project. Amos is asking, can you put up online or email the deck? And I can answer that from our perspective. We have the deck, and we will have it on our website, which you've seen at the beginning of this presentation. It's simply californiarelief.org resources/webinars. And I'm sure that that's also on Miranda's. Miranda probably has the presentations. You have them on yours as well, Miranda?
I don't have this particular one on, but I'll tell you what, I will ask to put it on there so people can view it. And even better, I'll link to the recording of this on my website so people will have the context.
Right, and we do both, right? We always have the deck, and we also have the recording, so that'll be great.
Yeah.
So I have another question from Greg McPherson, and Greg is asking, and for those of you who are new to urban trees, Greg McPherson was the urban forest researcher with the U.S. Forest Service back in the 90s, well, maybe in the 80s, but the 90s and the 2000s, who did a whole bunch to quantify the benefits of trees with respect to urban areas. So he blazed a trail there. His question is, will the resolution of the new NAPE imagery be better than the 1 meter 2012 data?
It will not. It's 2018 spatial resolution. It will not be better.
It's going to be 1 meter. Okay.
It's going to be 1 meter, but the LiDAR data, boy, if we get that 2 to 3 years from now, that would be probably better than 1 meter, we're thinking. But, it's all speculation, but it is available, and we aren't the driver behind that LiDAR data, so I think it depends on what the those rural areas and forests want, and will be the benefit of it. But I'd be very surprised if we didn't get something better than 1 meter at this point, because it is available. Yeah.
And I guess we're assuming that everybody knows what LiDAR data is. And do you want to explain it, Miranda?
Yeah, I can explain it real quick. Simply put, it's another way of visualizing our landscape. The added benefit, I won't get into the details about how it's different, how it's collected differently or what's going on there. But what I can say is that the LiDAR gives us an elevation, which is really important, of all structures and things out there, as I understand it. And so it's not just the buildings, but also the trees. And so you can not only tell a little bit, right now we're just looking looking at the ground from above. Imagine if we had some depth to that. We can tell you how big the tree is, how old it is. We can estimate from the canopy, but it's a lot more information there in the LiDAR data, and you can mesh it with other things to tell a different type of story or explain a different type of work that you want to do. And so it's just added information about the trees. And as I mentioned, one of the things that there's a couple groups out there right now that are using, I was just at a forest health meeting, and they were using LiDAR data to identify tree species in a forest and whether or not they were infested with a certain bug. And I was totally floored that they could use the data to tell us which ones were infested or not. So, I mean, if we got the data in the right place, the right time, it would be incredibly useful. Now, the reason we don't have it now is, moolah, money. It's pretty darn expensive to get this, and why we have some coverage areas in California and urban areas, we don't have all of it. I think it's NRCS actually has an online platform for where all data, LiDAR data, is available. And so you can actually go on there and look to see if you have LiDAR data available in your area. And but it doesn't cover all of California.
Okay, cool.
From what I understand.
Now we have another question from Claire Statham, and she says, I am a private citizen in Fresno who is interested in putting together a citizen group to work on replanting the frontage roads and street islands. Do you know of any citizen-led groups that have used your data to apply for grants and work with municipalities to replant areas of their cities?
Yes, that Santa Maria group, that was exactly what it was. It was a small community group that it was in the neighborhood that I worked in, and we had an office there that reached out to me on a personal, because they knew me as a forestry person, but they didn't know what my background was, and so they reached out to me why I was there, and that was something I was able to do. It was a small community group. It wasn't like a tree planting nonprofit. It was they were a neighborhood association that wanted to they were part of a larger council group of neighborhood associations that wanted to bring in a number of different groups together to prioritize planting. So absolutely, that's exactly what we hope it gets used for. A lot of cities have a lot more sophisticated viewers and ways to analyze this, but it's the small and medium-sized cities and towns that I'm really targeting with this viewer that don't necessarily have this available to them. And so I toggled to Fresno right here. So you can kind of see just that we have coverage for a fair number of the canopy cover. I'm just going to unclick, and there you can see where the trees are, and we can make it topographic so you can see a little better. So we have coverage in the Fresno area to do that, and you can zoom, as I said, in and out, to your community, and it's divvied up by census tract in here. That's the dark lines there. And then there's the roads, so you can kind of see where, locate yourself in here if you're familiar with the roads in Fresno.
Okay. Next question from Tom Brandenbury. Can you define urban?
Okay, yeah, so great question. A lot of people define urban in different ways. Urban, for the state of purposes of this viewer, is defined by the U.S. Census Bureau as an urban cluster, and it has to do with the amount of population that you have.
Cool. Now, I just want to do a slight time check. We're 2 minutes before noon, but we have just a couple more questions, so we're going to keep going. One more question. Will the data, this is from Sherman Dean, will the data for air pollution come from CARB, that's the California Air Resources Board, or where else is data on air pollution being collected?
So I don't have a good answer to that, but what you can do is go to our website and click on map layer information, and I have a link to the CalEnviroscreen layers, and they go in agonizing detail about the air pollution monitors, when they were what information was collected, the averages, and the errors that are involved with the accuracy of that stuff. So it's all available on CalEnviroscreen website.
Cool. Our last question from Wanda Stewart is, what applications do you imagine using with school students and programs? That's a good question. How can you get kids involved in using this data?
Wonderful, wonderful question. So we actually have a project that we're starting down in with a couple of schools in LA, and we're using this viewer tool to help them understand city planning. And so what we are giving them is all of these layers, all of these pieces of information, and then we're asking them the simple question, how do we prioritize where to plant trees, and where would you plant them? So we're actually making them act as city planners and helping them think about where to plant the trees. And so we actually have a little project, and they're creating 3D print models of these cities using a 3D printer of where to prioritize where our green infrastructure is going to go based on what they identify as important values for their trees of the future, which is a pretty cool application, I think, of the viewer. And because it's publicly available, they can then show it. Part of the exercises, they have to take it home and explain it, ask their parents what they value too. And so sly way for us to also educate their parents as well too about tree benefits.
Whoa, okay, yeah, the fact that they're using 3D print-offs, that's amazing. A couple follow-up questions from Wanda. First, a comment, this is excellent, P.S. this is excellent. And what are those schools? Which schools are those, Miranda?
You know, I don't know which ones. One of them is it's a school, oh shoot. It's a, but I can get that for you. Yassi Wilkins is working on that one, and I can follow up with that. So it's the school her daughter goes to, and one other school. So I'll have to double check that.
Okay, so Wanda, you can call California Relief, or you can call Miranda. I think that one of the next slides has her contact information. If not, you just call California Relief. That's fine. And then she said, thank you. At this point, I don't see any other questions. And again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today for this webinar and for your questions, as well as Miranda for providing this amazing tool and being so jazzed about it, answering all these questions. Again, we will be sending out a follow-up email, and we will have information about the webinar next time, as well as links to where we'll have some of the stuff we referenced during the day.